I'm Francesca Rudkin, and joining me today is Leanne Pooley, Canadian-New Zealand filmmaker. Do you still like being called Canadian-New Zealand?
Yeah, although I'm probably in New Zealand. I mean, I've been here a long time.
We claim you, yeah. The director of one of my favourite all-time New Zealand documentaries, The Top Twins, Untouchable Girls, as well as a host of many other documentaries, including The Stunning Beyond the Edge, Haunting Douglas, and also Shackleton's Captain. But today we're going to talk about 25 April, which is the animated feature-length film, documentary, about the Anzac experience in Gallipoli. So maybe, Leanne, first of all, you could just tell us a little bit about the project and how it came about.
Well, we made the film for the 100th anniversary. So it was the 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli landings. And we wanted to tell the story of ordinary lads from their point of view. And it's quite difficult. No one's alive. You know, there's no living Anzac survivors, if you like. And so my producer, Matthew Metcalf, came up with the idea of doing it as an animated documentary. And what that meant was I was able to bring those lads back to life. So we took their diaries and their letters and their memoirs from actual individuals, real people, and turned those diaries, letters, and memoirs into interviews. So I gave them to actors. And then I interviewed the actors as if I was interviewing the actual chaps who were there. And it was really amazing because the actors really, really got into it. Some of them contacted the families. They sort of really ingested these young men and one woman. And we were able to bring them back to life. And then animation meant I could tell the story in a way that gave me real freedom visually.
So it really takes you into that time, and that it almost feels like a debrief, like they've just actually returned from war and they're sharing their experience with you.
It's funny that you say that because that's the brief I gave to the actors. I said, in 1920 there was actually a big kind of investigation into what went wrong at Gallipoli. They did they did an investigation, and I said to these young guys, imagine you're part of this thing where you're telling the story of what happened to you and you're speaking, and you've been back from the war for a couple of years, but not very long. So it's all quite fresh. And the joy for me too was that usually when you make films about the war, you're talking to old men who are thinking about something that happened to them a very, very long time ago. The vast majority of documentaries about wars are talking about the distant past with people who have kind of, focus their brain over a period of years. The joy of doing this was the words we were using were the words that these chaps wrote in their diaries as it was happening. So there's an immediacy to their experience that you don't often get in a historical documentary.
And it's interesting to hear that some of the actors did so much research into the characters because they do express such personality, and I was wondering whether that came from what they were reading or whether that came from conversations with the family to learn more about these people.
I think a little bit of everything. I mean, the actors, as a documentary filmmaker, I don't always get to work with actors. I've done a few films where I've worked with actors, and it's just so fantastic because they bring so much to the table. And all 6 actors, I mean, they're all really high-profile New Zealand actors, wonderful, wonderful actors. Matt Welland's off in America now, starring in Narcos, and Chelsea Crayford Preston's just won last year. She won, Best Newcomer in Australia.
And she does a brilliant Australian accent.
She's I
actually thought it was an Australian.
Yeah, well, good, because we actually had a voice coach on set just to make sure everything she did was, because we didn't want to get nailed by the Australians, which we would have if she'd got that wrong. So the actors brought so much to the table, and I think they were quite affected. They read these diaries. They got to know these characters. They knew about their families and their children, and they really embodied the characters. And that just really, I never imagined how much that was going to bring to the film, and it was wonderful.
And you used motion capture technology for the interviews, is that correct?
We did. So we interview them, and they wear these special motion capture suits. So they've got little polka dot things all over their faces, and there's a very special hat that has cameras hanging off the front of it that records every little nuance of their movement. So if people see the film, when the interviewees, when their lips quiver or whatever, that's real. That's performance coming from the actor. And then what happens is the animators take the data that's generated by this system and they put animation onto that data.
Right. Have you ever done that before?
No. It was all, I hadn't done any of it before, so it was all new for me. It was a massive, massive learning curve. It was wonderful. Yeah. No, but it was all new.
And so there's quite a mix involved, because there's also computer-generated animation as well as drawn animation. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the backgrounds are all hand-drawn. So the environment, the world we put our characters into was all completely hand-drawn by the wonderful artists at Flux Animation. And then most of the character and moving animated characters in the sort of film, other than the interviews, are 3D generated animation. And then the interviews are motion capture. So there's sort of three different layers, if you like, yeah.
Did that add to the complexities of pulling all this together, or did it?
Well, to be honest with you, I just surrounded myself with people who knew what they were doing. That's the key. The key is to surround yourself with people who know what they're doing and really knew what they were doing. And, just I would explain what I wanted, how I wanted it to look. I wanted it to have a graphic novel feel. I wanted it to, I didn't want it, I said, it needs to be as far from a children's cartoon as we can be. I don't want it to look like Shrek. It needs to be something a little unusual, and then they made it happen.
Because it is a mix of graphic novel and very painterly as well. It has a great sort of texture to it, and you feel, the characters also talk an awful lot just about the setting and the environment that they were in, and the flies and the heat, and the animation kind of takes you there as well, which is a remarkable thing.
Well, we spent a lot of time, the animators referred to photographs constantly. So we tried to make sure that everything was accurate, even down to what the flies would have looked like. We did a whole fly thing. These are the different flies. So, there's a lot of attention to detail, and the animators made sure that this is what the tents would have looked like, this is what the trenches would have looked like, and so even though it's animated, it's realism in that way. And then sometimes I can depart from realism and go into the fantastic, which animation allows you to do. So, it was that wonderful opportunity as a director it was a smorgasbord of opportunities, really, because I could have the realism to sort of grab people, and then I could take them on a little fantasy that, boats could turn into birds or blood can turn into poppies because it's animated, and I can punctuate the story and try and encourage people to have emotions that maybe they wouldn't ordinarily have through these sort of more fantastic departures.
So when you sort of said to the team, look, we want a graphic novel look, were there any other visual references you gave them? Because you've come up with quite a distinctive visual style.
Yes, well, we had Colin Wilson, who's a really well-known graphic artist, not an animator, but a graphic novelist. He's done Judge Dredd, which for people who are into these things know a lot about. So Colin actually designed the characters for us, and I'm a huge fan of a film called Waltz with Bashir.
Yes.
And so that was obviously an inspiration. Waltz with, an Israeli film about the Lebanon War. So that was an inspiration. But we just worked. My brief was pretty clear that I wanted it to have that graphic novel feel. So Colin designed the characters with that in mind, and also he designed the characters to look like the real people as well. So it's sort of a combination of graphic novel and what the real people looked like.
So going back to these real people, how did you choose these characters?
Well, there was a year of research before we did any actual animating. So we read. And when I say we, there was a team of people headed by my head researcher, Kieran McGee, who was extraordinary. If there's a diary that she hasn't looked at in New Zealand, I'd be amazed. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of diaries and letters and oral histories. We just plowed through, and we were looking for specific things. We needed somebody to be there at the beginning. We needed somebody to be there at the end.
Of course, yes.
We needed there were certain battles that were very important to the New Zealand experience. We wanted those. So we were looking for characters that ticked a number of boxes. Ideally, we wanted them to cross paths with each other. I wanted a nurse, and for example, the reason the nurse is Australian is I wanted the nurse to be there on the first day, and I couldn't find a diary of a New Zealand nurse who was there on the day of the landing, because I wanted the nurse gives us the opportunity to be watching it from a distance. And I couldn't find there may have been a Kiwi nurse there on the day, but there were no diaries that we could find. So there were things we required, and
so it's almost like you started off with the story of Gallipoli, and having these markers, these points that you wanted to hit, and then you find these characters, and then you've got their words, so you've got the interviews, and so then did you storyboard the action around that?
Absolutely,
Is that sort of the order
absolutely. We almost made a radio documentary, you know.
Okay.
And one of the things too that we were looking for, not just ticking the boxes of certain events, I needed people who wrote in their diaries more than just the facts, because a lot of the diaries you read are really New Zealand in nature. It's bloody hot, you know. It's, you know, Joe died, and there wouldn't be any detail, you know. It would be what I wanted was people who wrote about their experience of being there in a way that had something more to say than just what was happening, and that was the other big challenge. But yeah, so we took the diaries, we gave them to actors, and then I did about an hour's interview with each character, as I would with a traditional documentary. I just sat them down and interviewed them. They wore costume for the interview, even though we're not going to see them, even though they're animated. They were all in costume so that they could truly embody the character, and I did an hour interview. So I went into the edit suite with about 6 hours worth of interview, and then I just wove it. Well, my editor Tim Woodhouse, who's also the co-writer of the film, we just sort of wove those interviews together the way we would in making a traditional documentary. Only the first pass was really a radio documentary because we had no pictures. And then once we did the sort of radio documentary, we started to storyboard it. And we storyboarded the whole film. Every single frame was storyboarded before any animation was done, because we couldn't afford to animate and then not use it.
Have you ever done that before in a documentary? Has that ever been required?
Beyond the Edge was pretty heavily storyboarded because it was 3D and highly dramatized. So it was storyboarded to a large extent. And actually Shackleton's Captain, we had storyboards for that as well. This is the most, we had an absolute frame, practically duration accurate animatic before we did anything, and that had to be signed off by the Film Commission before we went forward with animation. So it was the most I've ever done. But no, I've worked with storyboard artists quite a few times. Yeah.
You mentioned Tim Woodhouse, who of course you've worked with a lot, and I wanted to talk to you about the importance of these collaborations and the impact it's had on your career.
Well, Tim and I almost consider Tim and I to be a sort of a creative partnership in a way. You know, we've been working together. I've worked with Tim on every film I've made since 2003, so that's a long time in a small dark room, and we just, you know, it allows, there's a shorthand. We both sort of tend to see things through the same eyes in a way. You know, I had an intern once that sat in on the edit with us, and she said to me, you know, it's actually quite hard to learn anything from you two because neither one of you ever finishes a sentence. You know, I'll go, ooh, that's a bit, and he goes, yeah, I know. And I'll go, if you just come out, he goes, yeah, I know, before the, yeah. Right. And so neither of us finish a sentence because we both kind of know what the other one's thinking. And on the few occasions where I've made other things, the odd commercial or something, and I've worked with a different editor, I've discovered that I actually have to finish the sentence.
You know? I don't quite know what I'm trying to say. How do I say this? I need to articulate this. Yeah.
No, but you know, so Tim and I, we have an aesthetic that is, you know, we're on the same page creatively. We do fight like, you know, a married couple in that we bicker and we'll argue about things, but we both trust each other to be, if we're arguing, we're both doing it with the film in mind. It's not about ego or being right or whatever. And I know that about him and he knows that about me. So we can push each other and, you know, and be honest and know that that's about trying to get the best work. And I'm very lucky. And I work with David Long a lot, the composer, who I think did the most extraordinary score. I mean, the music, I believe, on 25 April is beautiful. You know, as beautiful a score as you're ever going to find on a movie. And David and I also have a bit of a shorthand. David understands me seemingly and gets a good sense of the vision that I have, and then brings this whole other beautiful thing to it. So, you know, they are important, those collaborations, especially as you know, you get a bit older and you get a bit kind of used to doing things. It's good to have someone who you trust to push you as well. And I keep trying to do things that are different, you know, whether it's 3D or animated or whatever. So I'm always in a state of abject terror. So it's quite good if you're in a state of abject terror to surround yourself with people who you know will help get you there.
That was actually going to be my next question, because you look at the films you've done, and a lot of the stories that you've told must have been very challenging to tell, whether it's Beyond the Edge or Shackleton's Captain and things. And I was wondering whether there needs to be that element of, there needs to be something new or challenging about a project for you to sort of take it on board now, or does it still always come back to telling that story?
Well, at the end of the day, if I won't, I'm not interested if I'm not interested in the story itself. So I am drawn to the notion of the story. Having said that, had this not been an animated film, if somebody said, "Oh, do you want to make a film about Gallipoli?" I might have said no, because, there's been half a dozen documentaries about Gallipoli. Peter Weir made a beautiful film, Gallipoli. I would have felt it had been kind of done. And it was only because Matthew said, let's animate, that made me think, oh, well, that's exciting. That's something, this story hasn't been told that way, and I've never done it. So it's exciting on those levels. So I probably wouldn't have done the film. Well, I'm sure I wouldn't have done the film had it not been for the animation. But usually it's the story that draws me to the project.
So can I ask that really awful question that everybody always asks, are you working on anything at the moment? What's next?
Well, I'm working on
numerous
half
ideas.
a dozen things, which is what you have to do in the hope that one of them, you throw balls in the air and hope one hits a hoop. So I'm working on a fiction script, actually. My first full fiction script, just to ensure the ongoing abject terror, which is nice because it's been optioned, and we'll see, whether or not. There's a long way between writing a script and making a movie, but we live in hope. And then I've got a couple doco projects that are kind of maybe, just pushing them around, seeing what we can land. And I've got an animated kids project that I'm just playing around with the chap who was one of the animation directors on 25 April. He and I are collaborating on a project too. So there's, always lots of different things.
Actually, is there one documentary idea that you've always wanted to make but you've actually never been able to get up off the ground? Is there something that's... there's always things, there's a couple of things that I didn't get up that I feel sad about after the fact, because, time went past and you go, gosh, if we'd managed to pull that off the way history unfolded, it would have been a really cool thing. Not a specific, I can't say there's a specific, that's the one thing I've always wanted to do. Yeah.
No, I mean, I had a project once that we were going to shoot over a 10-year period. This is when I lived in England, and I if we'd managed to pull it off, it was the first 10 years of the millennium, and had we pulled it off, it would have been amazing, because if you think of what happened, 9/11 happened, George Bush was president, then you've got the first black president. There were all these things unfolded, and if we'd pulled off what I was proposing, I think it would have been an extraordinary thing. But there's lots of things that don't happen.
Another idea around the corner.
That's right.
Yeah. Are you thrilled? I'll wrap this up in just a moment. I know I'm going to get carried away now, but are you... the access to documentaries is becoming... We're getting a lot more access to documentaries. They are playing in cinemas. Finally, we're getting the opportunity to enjoy them in the theatre and things. That's obvious. Have you seen a bit of a change in the last sort of maybe 5 years or the last decade of people being able to access documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a bit of a renaissance around theatrical documentary, which is great, and there's a lot of really great documentary film festivals in the world now. It's fantastic. I think it's partly because there's something about, it isn't Fast and Furious 15. There's something different. Although they have just made the most money of any franchise, so I should be aspiring to make Fast and Furious 15, but
no, you shouldn't.
There's sort of people, I think, know if a documentary's in the cinema, if it's survived and got to the cinema, because to get that far is actually quite tricky, that it's probably going to be worth a look too. People people know that they can go to a documentary and see a story that's likely to have an impact on something real in the world. And I think in a world where, I don't know, where it seems like it's going to hell in a handbasket slightly, that's sort of reassuring. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it's great for documentary.
Right, well, thank you so much for talking to us, and you'll be able to catch 25 April on the 25th of April at 8:30 p.m. on Rialto Channel.